We know in the human life that there is going to be hurt. None of us will be outside of that. And trauma ignored creates more trauma later.
Yeah.
It's always worth walking through it.
Well, Dr. Greg, it's great to have you back.
It is very good to be here, and what a topic that we have.
Let me ask you, Focus, we track the response that we're getting by subject matter.
Right.
So typically, depression, anxiety, marital strife, financial strife, sexual issues in marriage, all kind of tend to be at the top of the list. What are you seeing with your work?
What we're seeing now, and we have folks who are seeking help from all over, used to be a year ago anxiety, and people were called something related to anxiety. And now the word really is, people are calling up and they're saying, I've been traumatized, or I have so much trauma in my life, or I am so easily triggered by everything going on in the world, I feel overwhelmed.
Yeah.
That's what we're seeing.
Greg, let me play the opposite side of that. I mean,
Yes.
Some of us, I think, not to always be gender specific, but a lot of men are like, yeah, whatever, pick yourself up and go. But it is true. I mean, trauma impacts us. And describe for us that phenomena about kind of those that feel trauma and those that maybe, have some kind of super shield and they seemingly are above it all. And then
Right.
What are some of the definitions of trauma? If I could pack that all in.
Well, let's talk about it. So trauma is something probably shocking has happened. Maybe it's happened more than once, and it's really robbed you of any sense of safety. You don't feel emotionally safe. Probably you don't feel physically safe. And when we don't feel safe emotionally, we start to do things that sometimes are really self-destructive. And I really want to honor and respect, because I know there's those listening. Trauma, just hearing that word can be a trigger, because you've been so hurt, and the hurt can go so deep. It affects our whole being. And so just to talk about it, or even hear the word trauma, can be unsettling.
Yeah. You have a story in the book about Daryl, and I think
Yes.
what this points to is that idea of how trauma brings about hopelessness.
Right.
And I mean, that's something for me, even as an orphan kid, I never felt hopeless. I always felt like,
Yes.
hey, there's tomorrow. I remember being 5 years old when my parents divorced, and it was like, boy, they don't do this very well. I really didn't
Right.
own it. And
Right.
I just count that as God's grace.
There's God's grace. Sometimes there's a shield upon us that we're able to weather repeated traumas.
So talk about Daryl. What was
Sure.
Daryl's situation?
Okay, Daryl. Daryl was a young man, I believe, sixth grade. His parents took him to a flight show, and he was intrigued by these biplanes from, I think it was World War I. And Daryl was so excited about flying. And one of the things that happened was he got his license. I think he was 18, owned his own plane. He's 25.
Wow.
But then he's with his best friend, and he crashes the plane, and the plane is on fire. And they get him out, but his friend is lost, and his friend was taken in the crash. So long in Daryl's life, that trauma caused him to, reject God. The trauma, he felt responsible for his friend's
Sure.
death. So sometimes when we've had trauma, we may feel responsible for what happened. And then coming to a place, how do I even forgive this situation? How do I forgive myself? So in this case, trauma was carried for a very long time. He stayed away from the love of his life, which was flying, until much later. But he had to come to a point where he realized forgiveness. He had to forgive himself. And truly, it was a mechanical failure. It was nothing he had done.
Right.
But still feeling that responsibility.
That's got to be difficult as a therapist.
Right.
And you're with somebody, and rationally, you're seeing it's a mechanical failure. Why are you owning this?
And
you can say
Yes.
that, but it doesn't compute for him.
Right.
He still can't get out of the guilt of...
Well, because we get into the what if only. If I had only not taken him, if I had only... And you get into self-blame. And then you blame yourself for everything that happens in life. And so we start to become a victim.
Right. And so in that regard, Daryl is an example, but many people generally, what does healing look like generally?
Okay. Well, it means I really have to look at the truth of what happened. We have coping mechanisms. Maybe for a while I turned to alcohol, or I turned to secret eating, or I just isolated. I felt I couldn't trust people anymore, and I start to do self-destructive behaviors. Well, there comes a point I have to look at this and go, what I'm doing now is not working. And I honestly have to say my life is miserable. This is not working. And so a healing point will be acknowledging the truth. Okay, this happened, and I'm no longer going to do self-destructive behaviors. I am going to find a way to walk through this. I think that can feel overwhelming. Mm-hmm. For the person who's been a victim of sexual abuse and significant trauma, for the person that has been through the unspeakable abuse, to think about how do I really face this? And trauma ignored creates more trauma later.
Yeah.
It's always worth walking through it.
Part of it is a fog.
Yes.
You don't necessarily connect your today's actions to yesterday's hurt and pain.
Right.
The reason you react to something today. What are some of the truths about trauma?
Okay. There's some significant truths about trauma. Time will not heal it. I know. I wish that was different.
Boy, that's how many parents say that
right
to their kids? Well, time will heal your loss of a boyfriend or whatever it might be.
Trauma undealt with will create more trauma because we will go on a course of self-destruction. We are going to carry this trauma wherever we go. We're going to carry it into relationships. So the truth is trauma can affect intimacy in my relationships. Trauma can affect my ability to trust other people. And here's a big one. Trauma can affect my ability to feel that God loves me.
Yeah.
And that I actually have value in God's eyes. So trauma, think of it this way. Trauma distorts reality, and it can take us down a really destructive path. And I'm just saying today, because of working with thousands of folks through the years, you don't have to move on that path of being a victim. You do have to walk through this. Sometimes we need help walking through it.
Yeah.
Yes. And there is a healing that happens, I'm going to say, really from the Lord's, from God's intervention, from the Holy Spirit. There is a spiritual healing that can happen for us.
Greg, I haven't said it quite this way, but when you looked at the predictability of being able to find your way out of being traumatized, doesn't that point to Creator? That He created us in His image. He gave us the brain. And there's ways that you can study this as a scientist, like in psychology, especially with the undergirding of being a Christian. And you can help these people out of their darkness.
I can tell you, I know that we have a psalm that tells us that He heals the brokenhearted and He mends their wounds. I can tell you, I've seen that to be true over and over.
In your work, obviously, emotional wounds and wounds of mental instability.
Yes.
Yeah. Let me ask you again, I kind of leaned in that direction, but this idea that, just muscle your way through it. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps. These are words that I have used because I felt like that's what I had to do. And, this actually, even for Jean and I, this can be a difficulty because I remember she looked at me and said, Jim, not everybody can do that. That was the first time I felt a sense of fear in our marriage. Like, are you kidding? Not everybody does this? This is the only way I've learned how to cope with it is get up and go.
Yeah.
And both are true, I would think, but speak to that dynamic of the person that just, okay, here we go, let's go.
Well, and we need to keep that get up and go, because also there is, the Lord's going to be with me as I walk through this. I am going to walk through it. But I need to understand this did have effects on my life. I may not see all those effects, but it did affect me. And we've got to be willing to look at that. There's something called post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right.
And
military deals with this all the time.
Yes. And there's times when you were something terrible happened in your life, you had a significant loss or there was abuse, and you just kept going. But later on in life, suddenly you notice, I'm having flashbacks. I'm dreaming about this. I'm feeling anxious all the time. I'm wanting to escape through excessive drinking or
some escape. Yeah. No, I mean, that's so true. And in that regard, when you look at the lack of emotion, perhaps,
Yes.
that can become another difficult thing in marriage, because a person that does feel that kind of get up and go, you can begin to wall off emotions, and that's dangerous too.
Yes. I can cut off emotions, which can affect my ability to be intimate and close with another person. I could have a deeper relationship, but we build this self-protection. We do build a wall, and that's just for survival. Psychology has a term called dissociation.
Right.
So I dissociate, I disconnect from the reality just so I can function.
Right, and that's a protective mechanism, probably.
It is,
but not to
we can't
be
stay in
engaged
that
forever.
Forever,
yeah.
Correct.
You felt, I believe it was connected to your work all those 40 years ago,
Yes.
as we celebrate your sinner's birthday.
Yes.
But there was a point where you experienced depression over, I think, running this thing, right? Was that the connection?
I do have a personal story, and I know what it's like to walk through traumatic events. And I was a young person, so excited about my work, felt like God called me to do this. But I made some helping mistakes. I said yes to helping all the time. That's that 6 days a week of counseling, and you're so immersed in what you're doing. And after a while, I began to break down. After a while, I began to have some of the same symptoms of somebody I'm working with, maybe depression. And so there was a point where I really felt like I missed my calling. I've got to do something different. And I walked through some dark days, but I also know the other side. It was worth going through, because now the Lord used that painful experience. No, I had to redesign my life. I had to understand self-care and boundaries and taking care of marriage relationship and taking care of those relationships. I had to learn a lot. But I can tell you now, I have greater empathy and understanding for others going through it.
Well, it's hard to say no.
It is.
Yeah.
And I had good intention.
Let's get into a little bit of the brain chemistry. We get so wonkish in this. We throw around these, these chemicals that help us or hurt us in our brain. Cortisol is one.
Yes.
What is cortisol? Why does it exist? And if we have too much or too little, what's going on?
So if you think about being stressed out for a period of time, maybe it's chronic stress. And it takes energy just to breathe. You're so stressed out. Your adrenal glands have been pumping a chemical called cortisol. And it's pumping and pumping, and eventually it makes its way to the brain. Now, we need a little bit of cortisol, but not a lot. And then it begins to affect those other chemicals. You've heard the word serotonin. Having healthy serotonin in our brain, which, by the way, is made in our gut. It travels from our gut through something called the vagus nerve, gets to our brain, and that serotonin has to do with sleep, has to do with mood. Serotonin too little, you're going to feel depressed. So serotonin, and then the other feel-good chemical, the way God made us, is dopamine. And dopamine actually is activated even when we exercise. Dopamine is necessary just to feel good.
Yeah.
Okay. Trauma disrupts brain chemistry. Trauma can actually, and repeated traumas can alter brain chemistry. And we can actually look at, they're called PET scans. We can look at a traumatized brain, and we can look at a normal brain. And you don't have to be a brain scientist. You can go, these brains look different.
Is that obvious?
It can be pretty obvious.
Yeah.
And so there is one other part of the brain, the amygdala, back here, it controls emotion, and it will get overstimulated with trauma, and your moods may seem up and down, and you can't seem to regulate your mood. And then God made this prefrontal cortex right here in the middle of my forehead. That's where I'm supposed to make good decisions.
That's
right?
the last part of the brain to develop, right?
Yeah, it's the last, for guys, it's the last part of the brain to develop. Yeah,
Just somehow we knew that.
So, and it's where we call it the wise brain. It's where you're supposed to make good decisions.
The adult brain.
The adult brain. Trauma decreases blood flow to that part of the brain.
Huh.
And so you may have trouble making decisions. You may feel anxious all the time. Emotions may seem up and down. And this is all because trauma can and does affect the brain.
In the book, you mention an example of Monica. I'm sure you've changed all these names, so we're not outing anybody if anybody's concerned. But Monica, the description there is how that brain trauma affected her everyday thinking. What went on with Monica?
Yes, with Monica, and not the real name.
Right, of course not.
But Monica had a significant abuse and loss in her early growing up. And she had a daughter, and she became hyper vigilant to anything to do with her daughter. Anything. Like, is my daughter okay? If she couldn't text her and get an immediate response back. So she created a lot of anxiety that was really overprotective, even with an adult married daughter, still worried about her. And that was really back because of early trauma for the mother, for Monica. And so it can carry over to present day relationships. We lose track of healthy boundaries. She became overly involved, and if she didn't hear back from her, she had to get in the car and go find her. So that's the extent that this can carry you.
Well, and that sounds like the tipping edge of anxiety again. It's kind of this cycle, right? And so you end up with this idea of the loss of future positiveness, that the future is only going to be negative.
And there's what I call anticipatory anxiety. I'm only anticipating the negative.
Right.
And I'm fixated on that.
What's that? They call that now catastrophization or something, that it's always catastrophe. When you look at external inputs with that, and you look at the dark success of that on social media, cable news, it's like they have figured this out and they're tapping that constantly in our brain chemistry to be anxious because it keeps you engaged with what they're trying to pitch. Is
anxiety will keep you engaged in an endless news cycle.
Right.
Absolutely.
And the mechanism there, it is sophisticated.
Absolutely.
But that's what they're doing, right?
Yeah. And we have a new term in the psychology field called foreshortened future. So we have a generation of folks who have been traumatized. 2/3 of kids will report being traumatized by their 16th birthday, 2/3. Okay, now remember, trauma can mean a lot of different things. So what's happening is they have a foreshortened future. What does that mean? I don't see a positive future.
Right.
We have a lot of apathy. We have a lot of depressed kids. We have their future doesn't look good to them. And so this is why we're seeing kids 16, 17 who are getting diagnosed early on with depression, anxiety. Even addiction is dropping to earlier ages.
Yeah, that's so sad. As Christian parents, let me just work in that parenting tactic. What is a way every day that we could help our children, especially our teens, kind of feel there's a future and talk about it positively? One thing, Gene's been really good, because I come home loaded with information. I mean, I'm talking to everybody, people in D.C., people at the state level, especially around the political arena. Yeah. And you get, I get home and I'm going, oh, you wouldn't believe what's going on in California. And then we go through it. And Gene was like quietly going, you know what? I don't know that will be good dinner conversation with the boys. Because, and it's a good reminder. And she's a good filter for me to say, let's talk about that quietly, just the two of us. But that's one example of what not to do, is to raise all these fears that we might have in front of our kids.
And we need to ask ourselves occasionally, what's the main thing that I'm talking about most of the time?
That's good.
Okay. And most of the time, am I talking about the negative? And believe me, there's lots of negative and a lot of it's true. So it's easy to go that way. But the other vantage point is, can I see how God's at work?
Right.
And can I see
a better question?
Yes. And every day, honestly, if we look, oh, God is at work. We're seeing it every day. And we need to keep a list of God's at work. And God's at work in our teenagers. Keep in relationship with them.
Yeah.
Do not give up on our kids.
Preach it. Let me ask you, how does trauma negatively impact the soul and derail the dreams?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So trauma changes how I see myself. I'm no longer worthy. A word that could come to mind is I feel shame. I feel like I'm ruined. Trauma has made me defective. Trauma has put a black mark on my life, and I don't have a good future. I'm getting what I deserve. That's the kinds of things that are coming to mind. And so the damage to the soul is you don't see that God still loves you, and there's still a plan for you, and the plan for you is good. I can't explain why all this happened to you. I know trauma and the effects are real. I know the pain is real, but it doesn't define your future.
No, it's really, really good. I'm thinking of shame and the power of shame in our culture.
Yes.
It's inordinately over-empowered.
If we take what social media is doing to our youth, it doesn't make you feel any better about yourself. Right?
No, because it thrives on keeping you off balance.
Keeps you off balance. And ultimately, it's not adding to your self-esteem or your self-worth. It's taking from you. And some of the things that are being pushed on you through social media are lies. They're lies about you.
Yeah, when you look at John 10:10, I always think of it in a physical context where that scripture says the thief comes, speaking of the evil one, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy.
Yes.
I'm always thinking of that in terms of physical things, but emotionally, he's probably wreaking even greater havoc in that steal our joy, steal our contentment, steal our hope for the future.
If I don't have hope for the future, I don't have joy for the present. So well said.
Yeah. Greg, let me ask you to give that person, this is really a difficult question. I get that because you don't have the context for what they're going through. But for the person listening or watching on YouTube who's going, oh, you guys are describing me. I'm in that traumatized position. And it was years ago, but I've never dealt with it. What are some things that they can do to break that cycle, to say, okay, I heard something on Focus on the Family today. I need to do something. Yes. What is it that they might do even before they call for help?
Well, one of the things, I would get a journal, some blank paper, and I would write down and just pause for 15 minutes, write out the effects of trauma in my life, and just write for 15 minutes.
Wow.
And then stop writing after 15 minutes because you could probably go on. But look at that and just write it out down because I want you to see the reality. And sometimes when we start writing, other things will come to our mind. And whatever you wrote down, the effects do not have to stay the same. Your future can change. And there is hope for you. Hope comes when we have a plan. So now you're writing it down. This is what it's done to me. And now probably I do need to reach out and take the next step.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And I think that's powerful to write it down so you actually see it. You're getting it out of your heart and your head onto paper. And it becomes a little more tangible than not just an idea rolling around in your thoughts.
And maybe that's the first time you've ever done that.
Yeah.
But one of the things that will come up is you'll look at that and go, there's probably a lot to forgive in my life, and it might feel overwhelming.
One of the steps to recovering and overcoming trauma is forgiveness. A lot of people walk through life not understanding how that formula works. I mean, I can't forgive my dad who did this to me. Often when I speak, I'll have men in their 50s, 60s, 70s come up to me in tears saying, how did you ever forgive your alcoholic father? And it's so hard for me to answer, and I feel so inadequate because I never really felt that he wounded me. I felt like he had demons he could not control.
Sure.
And I think I just felt like he made bad choices, and he made them. I didn't make them for him. But it's a hard question for me to answer. How did you forgive your father? So how do we know when we have forgiven? And then 2, the power of that forgiveness.
Yes, I think forgiveness, as we look at trauma, there's self-forgiveness. You may have blamed yourself. You may have made some decisions. I was a victim of abuse, and I chose a whole series of unhealthy relationships. I became an addict, and you look back and go, whoa. So there's a self-forgiveness for choices that I made. But then there's a forgiveness. Is it the abuser? Is it forgiveness of poor choices from somebody else in the past? But if I don't get to that crossroads, I'm going to carry this my whole life. I don't even realize how much unforgiveness has affected me. I'm told in the scriptures to put away all bitterness and rage and anger. I know I'm supposed to put that away, but the question is, okay, how do I do it? There's a decision I have to make. There's a day of decision that says, I don't know how. I don't know what this really means, but I'm going to make the decision today to begin to forgive. And if you just need to say that out loud, I'm making a decision today to begin to forgive. Now, forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. If you have a person who has abused you and they're still alive, that doesn't mean I'm suggesting you go and have a relationship with them. It doesn't mean necessarily there's going to be reconciliation. What it really means is I'm tired of the effects this has had in my life. I don't want these effects anymore. I want to be free of that.
Sometimes I'm going, because I'll get challenged,
Yes.
Did you really forgive your father? And I'm going, I think I did. I don't feel anything. How do we know when it's done, when
it's actually
forgiven?
happened?
Yeah.
Well, I want you to see it as, I'm going to need to probably verbalize this and say it out loud. Begin to see yourself as, I'm an initiator of forgiveness. I'm not going to carry bitterness. I'm not going to take on offenses. If that person's having a bad day, I'm not going to absorb all their issues. I'm not going to take it on. So begin to see how you're going to handle hurt differently. How do I know that I've forgiven? Well, they're not living rent-free in your brain anymore,
They're not
right?
front and center?
Yes. Yeah. I'm not wishing harm on them anymore.
It's kind of forgotten.
They're not in my conversation all the time, Yeah.
That's good, yeah.
I'm not using their name in vain. So you begin to feel free. You will feel emotionally lighter. Now, you're going to need to ask God to help you do this. There is some forgiveness. It's so unbelievable that it can only be accomplished by the intervention of God's love in your life. That's the only way this is going to happen. And I get that.
Yeah. The benefits of forgiving.
Well, it's going to affect all your relationships.
You won't be bitter and angry?
Well, yeah. It's like a toxicity.
Yeah.
There's the bitterness. There's the resentment. And you've learned maybe to isolate. You don't fully trust people. You don't really let people fully in. You've learned to do a lot of self-protection. And so if I'm forgiving, I can really be free in my relationships. And I don't feel like I have to hurt others anymore.
Right.
A person that really is high on criticism, listen to them. Do they have a spirit of criticism in their life? They may have some unforgiveness.
Oh, that's interesting to connect those dots. What role does grief play in the forgiveness process? I mean, grief, I wouldn't necessarily relate it to forgiveness, but getting through grief gets you toward a path of forgiveness?
Well, I have to process all the loss. There's the loss of relationship. There's a loss of maybe some things in my past that I regret. Grief also says, I have to let go of this. And as odd as it sounds, when I forgive, I'm letting go of pain. I'm letting go of toxic emotions. And so letting go of that, there's a loss.
There's no formula to grief, but it shouldn't last very long, right? But I mean, it could be weeks, it could be months.
Sure.
It should not be years,
Think of
probably.
griefs like waves.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm doing good. I feel like I've really let go of that. I'm processing my hurt. I'm grieving my loss. And you go, oh, I'm doing well. And then 2 days later, there may be somebody that reminds you of a person that hurt you. And so you get kind of that recall again. So be careful. You don't have to pick it up again. Yeah, but it's a reminder. No, I'm letting this go.
Yeah. You use the metaphor in the book, which I heard this long ago. I think it was a book calling something like Fly Like a Bison or something. I can't remember the exact title. But in there, that's the first time I had seen that analogy. And you use it in your book.
Sure.
Be a bison, not a cow.
Well, when there's fear, there's a thunderstorm, okay, the cows, they run the other way.
They run away from the storm, which is coming after them.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, bison are different. Bison are interesting. They come together as a herd, and they go into the storm. They face it. So what I'm saying is, yes, you need to face the forgiveness, the unforgiveness. You've got to go through this storm, but you will go through and you will be stronger. Your relationships will be stronger. You're going to feel like there was a breakthrough in God's love for you. You're going to feel it at a deeper level. So don't run away from this.
Yeah. And the idea that the bison, as they do that, they get through the storm more quickly because a cow runs with the storm. It stays over them.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting metaphor.
It is.
Let me speak to that regarding Christians particularly and pain in this life, etc.
Yes.
You know, that wonderful psalm that says he's close to the brokenhearted and saves those crushed in spirit.
Right.
It sounds like a prerequisite for coming to know the Lord. That, you know, the Lord is searching for that soul who is broken because his compassion is there. And something about this life, I don't think people get through this life without trauma, without being broken.
Yes.
Something will get you, even if you have a Cinderella, golden touch, whatever word you want to use. Eventually, someone around you will hurt. You will hurt. It happens. That's what this life is about. So I think the question is, how do we process that as Christians so that it's healthy and beneficial to our understanding of this life rather than a grievance that we have with God?
We know in the human life that there is going to be hurt. None of us will be outside of that. There will be. It's what we do with that. And it's an opportunity to see that God really is not only walking beside us, but God is with us. And so my encouragement when there's been hurt, part of the hope of it is understanding God's presence in your life. And there's an element of faith here. You're going to need to walk forward believing by faith that God's word is true. He is with me. And there is a redemption side. There's a side where I grow stronger. There's a side that I feel like God is using me now. There's no pain is wasted.
Yeah.
And let's look at that. I'm much more empathetic and understanding and hopefully patient for those who have gone through significant trauma.
And you've heard so much as a counselor.
Yes, you
My
do.
goodness.
Yes. But I also have seen the turnaround story. And part of what we see is God is changing lives for good for a purpose. And folks who walk through their pain, they don't see it at the time. But part of the redemption and healing is God is going to be using that. And you are going to help others.
You know, Greg, that seems to be such a conflict when we go through trauma. Where was God?
Yes.
Why, God? Why did you let me go through that? It could become this loop that we play until we resolve that somehow. For the person that has that kind of hard heart, if I could say it that way, toward the Lord, what do you recommend? One thing for me is go to God. He can take it. You can tell him exactly what you're feeling because he already knows your heart.
I would tell God exactly how I'm feeling. And then I would thank him, even if I don't feel it. Thank you for your presence. Thank you that you are going to see me through this. So move it from a why, and this is easier said than done. Okay, move it from a why to thank you, Lord, that you're going to see me through this. I don't see the end yet, but thank you that your word is true. I'm going to keep going.
You know, I'm thinking of Paul. I've thought a lot about this lately. Paul in jail. And he sang and he consoled the jailers who it seems to imply they were sympathetic that Paul shouldn't be jailed. And he was like, you know, reassuring them, hey, if God didn't want me here, I wouldn't be here. Don't worry about it. I mean, that's the impression I get, the paraphrased version. And even when the angel broke his chains and those around him and they were free to get out of jail, he consoled that jailer to say, it's okay, we're going to stay. You know?
Yes.
I mean, it's just interesting that Paul had a completely different attitude than I would have. And I want more of that Paul attitude. What did he have that most of us don't?
Well, I think he might have put some focus on praise, praising God. And during pain and during times, if you've been traumatized, you're in shock. Your systems have shut down, and it's hard to make a decision. But I want you to thank God that he is with you. You don't see it. You may not feel it. But you will.
No matter your circumstances.
No matter your circumstances.
So you can't say, but Greg, you don't know what I'm going through.
No matter the circumstance.
Yeah, that's right. Greg, let me ask you this. Bill and Pam Farrell have been on the program, and we always enjoy when they come on. And they wrote a book called Men Are Like Waffles and Women Are Like Spaghetti. And they're kind of talking about the physiology between the two genders. And
yes.
The fact that women are so connected in their brain connectivity. I mean, it's
true.
They're list making, they're thinking of 14 things, and men are like, I cannot do that, you know? And we have more limitations in some way. But when you're looking at this, especially for the anxiety and then the triumphing over trauma, both are struggling in this area. But just because of that brain connectivity for a woman, does she struggle more so with all the things that are attached to the trauma?
I think one of the things is she may even be a better historian of things that have happened. Sometimes the memory recall, right down to what I was wearing, or the recall can be different than it could be for a male brain. So, but we all are processing just in different ways. We're all going to cope with it, and maybe in little different ways.
In that context, what's the physical downside of this trauma, of being in trauma, lingering in trauma, not forgiving? What do we feel physically?
The longer we stay with the trauma in our life, like picture it as active in your body, we do know that trauma will create inflammation. Inflammation is the, if you will, the seedbed for disease to start, for us to set ourselves up for some physical complications. We know that trauma, you may suffer from headaches, unexplained, a lot of digestive issues.
Yeah.
And so the healing and the trauma, or healing of trauma, will affect the whole body.
Oh, yeah.
And you will feel different. You'll feel different physically.
Won't sleep as well?
So, yes.
Yeah.
Sleep's a big one.
Yeah.
And anybody with trauma may be afraid to sleep because of dreams, or you may find yourself going long periods of time trying to stay awake and not fall asleep because I'm afraid of what a dream might be.
That's so true. When we're feeling depressed or anxious, negative thoughts hit us so hard. I mean, that's what we're describing. And then, then it's this loop of you're not meeting expectations, you're not good enough, and so it goes. What are some ways we can reset or reframe the way we think about ourselves, about our circumstances, about others?
Well, one of the things I want you to look at is renewing your mind. What am I doing?
That sounds big.
I know. But
doesn't it?
I'll give you a personal example. I have it right here. A personal example.
Okay.
Take the old-fashioned 3x5 card. 3x5 card.
There you go.
I want you to put, I have 3 here. They have different verses. These are in different suit pockets. But say, I want you to go outside. I want you to go for a walk. And I want you to read whatever verse it is that is renewing your mind. I want you to say it out loud. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, present my request. Okay. And I want you, just a practical thing. I know we don't use 3x5 cards very often.
No, I think it's
just
great.
happen to have
You
them
can
with
find
me.
them almost anywhere. They're pretty cheap.
But I want you to say God's word out loud to renew your mind.
Yeah, that's good.
And do that several times throughout the day. I want you to change and create different sleep hygiene. I used to work in sleep research, so sleep and mental health is of great interest to me. We're in a sleep epidemic. People's sleep has never been so disrupted as it is now. And I want you to do the same thing each night. Get off the device an hour before bed, okay? Yeah. I want you to have a super dark bedroom. I want you to do the same things each night, the pre-sleep routine. But I want you to start building a different framework for sleep. I want the last thing going in your mind to be a praise of something that God's at work, thankfulness. But retool your sleep habits.
Thankfulness, I would think the byproduct of that is peace.
Peace.
Yeah. Which helps you sleep,
So,
right?
yes.
It just sets your mind at peace. You know, when you look at that, Greg, you think of the garden and what God created for Adam and Eve. And then you think of sin and chaos entering in the world. This is all about that kind of spiritual and literal physical combat between chaos and God's peace, right?
Yes,
That's
creating
the whole
order.
thing. Creating order out of disorder, out of chaos.
Yes.
And God never intended for us to actually live in that. And that is the description of heaven. No more tears, no more fear, no more. That's what we were created for. And that's why it feels so disjointed in this life. It feels dark at times and not going the way it should go. And there's that hole in our heart that only God can fill, right?
And we have to recognize there are things that are simply outside of our control.
Hey, let me move to reclaiming your power.
Okay.
And you had a great example of that from an NBA player. I think his name was Monty Williams.
Oh, yes.
Who was a good illustration of this. What happened to Monty and his family?
His wife with a couple of kids were coming home from an event, and they were in a tragic automobile accident, and his wife was killed. A true story.
No fault of hers.
No fault of hers. A person actually was on drugs that hit him at high speed head on. 2 of his kids in the vehicle survived, but he lost his wife. And how do you recover from that? And he had to turn that. You think of that, talk about trauma, talk about tragedy, talk about he could be so resentful and angry at that other driver who was on drugs.
Well, even justified.
Yes. Oh, justified. Absolutely.
You know, that word is powerful, but you feel justified in that anger.
Yeah.
And so where did he go with it?
He made a decision where he began praying for that family, the other family. And part of a sign of forgiveness is, can you pray for that person that's injured you? Can you pray that God would bless them? Could you pray for that family that was represented, where a life was taken? So he made a decision. Now, that's a big decision, but he was not going to focus on the resentments. He was going to pray for that other family and use this for good.
What does it mean to pursue post-traumatic growth? I mean, I think that's a flavor of it right there, what we talked about. But how do you pursue post-traumatic growth?
Yes.
Those all sound like words that shouldn't be in the same sentence.
Yeah, we call it PTG, post-traumatic growth. Okay, so the trauma happened. I'm dealing with it. But how do I keep myself on a trajectory of continuing to grow? How am I going to keep making myself better? How am I going to use the scars to help others? How am I going to become stronger? How am I going to improve in my own self-care? What does God want me to do? And so post-traumatic growth says, I'm making a decision. I'm going to keep growing, and I'm going to have a greater impact because of my growth.
I think leading to that, this will be kind of the summary question. Why is faith in God so critical as a component to recovering from trauma?
Because we will see God reveal himself through this at some point. And so when I say faith, you go, okay, I don't know I have the faith. That's okay. Keep working on exercising the faith. You're going to see it. And God is going to take something, and you said it earlier, Jim, that was intended for evil. God's going to use it for good. So hang on. Don't give up on that.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I can say that is I've seen it in so many different people's lives.
Yeah.
I know it's true.
That's so good. Yeah, at the moment, it may not feel right even. It may not seem right, but it will be right. And people will understand that when they get to that aha moment.
There is another side to trauma.
Yeah. And this has been so good, Greg. Thanks for spending the time to write the book, to do what you are doing. Congratulations on 40 years celebrating the center's work and all the help you've provided. That's a wonderful way to spend your life. Yeah. So let me speak to you. I hope it's as clear as can be. We want you to be healthier. If you're in a place where you haven't forgiven, you're feeling the effects of trauma, you're not sleeping, all the things that we've covered, get in touch with us. First of all, we can give you a copy of Greg's great book, Triumph Over Trauma. And if we can do that in such a way that you can help the ministry for any amount, we'll send you the book as our way of saying thank you. If you can't afford it, we're a Christian ministry. We're going to be there for you, and we'll trust others will cover the cost of that. So simply get in touch with us and start that journey. We also have caring Christian counselors you can talk to, and John will give you the way to contact them.
Yeah, we're a phone call away, 800, the letter A and the word family, 800-232-6459. Just call and ask to speak to a counselor, and we'll set up a time for one of them to give you a call back. And we'll make sure that it's a good fit for that phone consultation. They'll talk with you. They'll hear you out, probably offer to pray with you, and suggest a local resource if you want to continue having ongoing counseling conversations. Again, 800, the letter A in the word family. And then if you'd like to donate, you can use that same number, or we've got all the details in the program description. And thanks for joining us for Focus on the Family with Jim Daly. I'm John Fuller, inviting you back as we once again help you and your family thrive in Christ.